The stagecoach breaks down 2 miles outside of Coldwater Creek on a Tuesday morning in October, and that is how Nora Callum arrives, not on wheels, not with any trace of dignity, but on foot, her boots raising small clouds of pale dust with every step, her trunk tucked under one arm like a thing she refuses to surrender to the road. She is 26 years old. She has $2 in her coat pocket, and the kind of face that does not give things away easily. The Colorado sky above her is enormous and cold, and entirely indifferent to her circumstances. The Rockies stand at the far edge of the valley, already white-capped, watching everything and offering nothing. She walks the full 2 miles. By the time she reaches the edge of town, the main street of Coldwater Creek has arranged itself into an audience without quite meaning to. A man outside the feed store stops stacking crates. 2 women near the dry goods window slow their conversation to nothing. A pair of ranch hands lean against the post outside the saloon with the particular stillness of men pretending not to stare. The town reads her the instant she steps off the dirt road and onto the timber-planked walk. The worn blue dress, the dust on the hem, the set of her jaw that says she already knows exactly what she looks like and has decided not to let it. The second week at Broken Ridge begins the way the first ended. In silence, in distance, in the particular rhythm of 2 people moving through the same space without ever quite occupying it together. Nora rises before dawn, not from sleeplessness, though the cot in her room is narrow, and the walls thin enough to carry every sound the ranch makes at night. The wind working against the shutters, the cattle shifting in their pen, the occasional creak of floorboards in the hall that she has learned to identify by location. She rises early because that is when the light comes through the east-facing window at an angle that makes ledger columns readable without straining, and she has already decided that the ranch accounts are where she will begin. James has not asked her to look at them. He has not asked her to do much of anything beyond what he outlined on that first evening. Manage the house, keep the kitchen functional, stay out of the business of the land. Nora has no intention of staying out of the business of the land. She does not say this. She simply opens the ledger on the morning of the 8th day, settles into the chair by the east window with a pencil and a fresh sheet of paper, and begins. What she finds in the first hour is irritating. What she finds in the second is alarming. The accounts are not chaotic. James is not a man who keeps sloppy records. Every entry is written in the same careful, compressed hand. Dates, quantities, costs. But layered beneath the surface of that order, repeated across 6 months of entries, is a pattern so consistent it cannot be accidental. Hale's General Supply, the only trade house in Coldwater Creek willing to extend credit to remote ranches, appears on nearly every page. Flour, salt, rope, nails, lamp oil, standard inventory for any working ranch. The prices, at a first pass, look plausible. At a second pass, with the figures compared side by side against the quantities listed, they are not. The October nail order, billed for £40, recorded as delivered 30. The August lamp oil, billed at the Cheyenne commercial rate, though Hale's supply runs on territorial pricing. A service fee listed as transport surcharge that appears 4 times in 3 months with no corresponding receipt. Nora circles each entry lightly in pencil and moves on. By the time the morning light shifts from pale gold to full white, she has filled 2 columns on her separate sheet and circled 11 entries in the ledger. She closes the book, sets it back exactly where she found it, and folds her notes into the small notebook she has taken to carrying in her apron pocket. She says nothing to James at breakfast. He comes in from the barn with his hat still on, and his coat carrying the smell of cold air and horses, and he eats standing at the counter the way he has every morning since she arrived, without looking at the table she sets each day. She places his coffee near the stove where he can reach it without sitting, goes back to her work, and neither of them speaks until he sets the empty cup down and walks back out. It is not hostile. It is simply the arrangement, functioning exactly as designed. The barn nearly kills one of the hands on a Wednesday. Nora is crossing the yard with a basket when she hears the crack, a sound like a rifle shot, deep and structural, followed immediately by shouting. She reaches the barn door 30 seconds later to find 2 hands standing beneath a crossbeam that has dropped 6 inches on one side, its upper support bowed outward and trembling. One of the men carries a gash along his shoulder where the edge of a falling tool rack caught him on the way down. He is upright. He is fortunate. James arrives from the far pasture at a run, examines the beam with the focused expression of a man running calculations, pulls on it twice and declares the support rotten through. The wood must have been compromised for months, he says, the weight finally winning out. He instructs the hands to shore it with a temporary brace and adds the repair to the week's work list. The hands accept this. They move on. Nora does not move on. She waits until the men have cleared the barn and James has returned to the pasture. And then she goes in alone. The space smells of hay and horses and cold timber, pale light falling through the gaps in the upper boards in long diagonal shafts. She finds the broken beam without difficulty. It is the only crossbeam in the structure, with a visible fracture running its length. She examines it from below, then drags a hay crate under it and climbs up to look more closely at the point of origin. The wood is not rotten. The grain of the split is rough where it finally gave way, yes, but at the fracture's starting point, the surface tells a different story. Smoother, more deliberate. She runs one finger along it, slowly, and does not allow her expression to change. She climbs down from the crate and stands in the middle of the barn for a long moment, looking at nothing in particular. Outside, she circles the building slowly, examining the ground along the far wall where the morning mud has not yet dried beneath the shadow of the eaves. She finds them 8 feet from the corner, a cluster of horseshoe impressions, deep-set and close together, the angle of approach facing away from the barn in a direction that corresponds to no road, no grazing route, no path any working hand would take to reach the property at night. She does not call for James. She goes back to her room, takes out the notebook, and records the location of the marks, the direction they face, the date, the weather conditions, and a rough sketch of their angle relative to the barn wall. Then she slides the notebook beneath the loose board under her cot and goes to start the midday meal. "How'd the beam go?" Pete asks from the yard when she comes back outside. "Mr. Cole says it was the wood," she says. "Hold barn," Pete says and goes back to mending a length of fence post. He says it easily, the way a man says something he has already decided is true, and Nora watches him for one additional second before she moves on. She notes the exchange. She writes nothing. The week that follows, she continues the work of the house and does not appear to be doing anything beyond it. She cooks, she mends, she reorganizes the supply shelves in the back room with the quiet efficiency of someone who has managed a household with limited resources before. But every morning before the light is fully up, she is at the ledger, and every afternoon she finds small reasons to speak with the merchants who pass through Coldwater Creek on their weekly routes east. It takes her 4 days to confirm what the numbers already suggest. There is a dry goods operation in Millhaven, 11 miles east along the Valley Road, that supplies 6 ranches in the surrounding territory and has never once charged a transport surcharge. Their pricing on standard goods runs 15% below Hale's listed rate on every comparable item she can find. She sends a letter to the Millhaven merchant on a Friday. She rides there herself the following Monday. James is in the north pasture when she leaves. She tells the hands she is going into town for household supplies. This is not entirely false. The ride to Millhaven takes just under 2 hours on a clear morning, with the mountains standing to the left and the valley floor unrolling ahead in long, dry swells of autumn grass, gone amber and rust at the edges. Nora has not ridden much since Springfield, but the mare James keeps for ranch errands is even-tempered, and she finds her balance quickly. The air at this elevation has a particular quality in October, thin and sharp and carrying the early cold of the high country down from the passes, cutting through a wool coat like it has a point to make. The merchant, a broad man named Grady with ink-stained fingers and a practical eye, listens to her figures without interruption. When she finishes presenting them, he looks at her across his counter for a moment. "You're the woman Cole married," he says. "I am," she says. He nods once, pulls his order book from beneath the counter and opens it. She returns to Broken Ridge that evening with a signed supply agreement, a revised price list folded in her coat pocket, and the clean, quiet satisfaction of a problem that has been met head-on. She stables the mare herself, brushes her down, fills the water bucket. She is nearly at the kitchen door when James steps off the porch. He is holding a paper. The draft she had written and crossed out and left in the waste bin beside the writing desk. The copy she sent to Grady was clean, but this one is covered in calculations and corrected figures. It is readable enough to tell him everything she did not. The silence between them has a different weight than usual, harder, the kind that has an edge to it. "You rode to Millhaven," he says. "The accounts needed correcting." "Without telling me." Nora holds his gaze. The evening light is failing behind the mountains, the cold coming down fast, the wind off the upper ridges carrying pine and frozen stone. "I told you the accounts needed attention the first week," she says. "You told me to manage the house." Millhaven is not the house. Neither is overpaying Hale by $40 a month. James says nothing. His jaw is set and his eyes are doing the thing she has come to recognize over the past weeks, moving slightly, working through numbers or consequences or both, giving nothing away about where they land. He looks at the draft in his hand, then at her. He goes inside without another word. Nora follows. She sets supper on the table. He sits down, which he has not done for supper since the first night of the arrangement, and eats in silence. She does not press. There is nothing left to press. The numbers are in the ledger, and the contract is in her pocket, and by the end of the month the accounts will say what they say. Pete is at the water trough the next morning when Nora crosses the yard, clearing it without being asked. He tips his hat when she passes. "Morning, ma'am," he says. "Morning," she says, and keeps walking. He is cooperative. He is steady. He has been at Broken Ridge longer than any of the other hands, and he works with the unhurried competence of a man who knows every board and fence post on the property by heart. There is nothing in his manner that invites suspicion, and Nora is not a woman who manufactures suspicion where none exists. She has enough to track already. 3 weeks after the Millhaven ride, the first invoices arrive from Grady. Clean figures, honest weights, no surcharges. Nora sets them on the kitchen table beside the final Hale ledger entries and leaves them there for James to find. He comes in at midday, stands at the table, and looks at both sets of numbers for a long time. His expression does not change. He does not apologize for the argument at the porch door, and she does not ask him to. He picks up the Millhaven invoice, reads it from top to bottom, and sets it back carefully. Then he moves the Hale ledger to the far end of the shelf, the place where finished records go when they are no longer active, and leaves the Millhaven sheet on the table, among the working documents, where the current business of the ranch lives. Nora watches him do it from the doorway. She lets the moment pass without comment. He offers no reply. Outside, the October wind moves through the dry grass in long, low pulls, and the mountains to the west have grown darker over the past week, the tree line losing its amber, the upper faces already white and hardening. Winter is not asking for permission here. It never does. It simply arrives the way everything in this country arrives, without ceremony, without announcement, and with the absolute patience of something that knows it will be obeyed. Nora turns from the doorway, puts the kettle on the stove, and opens the notebook to a clean page. There is more to observe. There is always more. And somewhere on the edge of the Broken Ridge property, pressed into mud that is already beginning to freeze, a set of horseshoe marks faces away from the barn in the direction of a road that leads, eventually, back to Coldwater Creek. She has not forgotten them. She will not. The rumor reaches Coldwater Creek, the way most damage reaches small towns. Quietly, in pieces, traveling from one mouth to the next until it has grown roots deep enough that no one can say exactly where it began. Nora first hears it from the silence. The wives of Coldwater Creek have been polite since her arrival. Not warm, not welcoming, but civil in the careful way of women who are reserving their judgment and have not yet decided what to do with it. The Sunday services at the town's small clapboard church have been the clearest social map available to her, and for the first 4 weeks she has stood at the edge of those gatherings and read it carefully. Who nods, who averts their gaze, who speaks, and about what? Who watches James from across the room with that particular expression that is not fear, but its refined cousin. On the 5th Sunday, the silence changes texture. Martha Aldrin, the wife of the dry goods merchant, does not return Nora's nod. She turns to speak to the woman beside her with the deliberate speed of someone who has made a decision. The pastor's wife, who had twice asked Nora about her travels from Illinois, finds a conversation across the room that requires her attention at the precise moment Nora approaches. These are small things, the kind of things a woman can excuse once, reason away twice, but cannot ignore on the third instance. Nora excuses nothing. She files each observation in the same quiet place she keeps the notebook entries, and she listens. By the midweek market, she has enough pieces to assemble the shape of it. What the town is saying, in that careful, indirectly worded way that allows its speakers to deny the cruelty while preserving its effect, is this. Nora Callum came to Coldwater Creek not out of circumstance, but out of desperation. That there are debts in Springfield. That she arrived with almost nothing, because she left with almost nothing because there was nothing left to take. That James Cole, a man who keeps to himself and asks few questions, was not so much chosen as targeted. An isolated rancher unlikely to check references or write letters back to Illinois before the ink on a marriage certificate dried. Nora hears this assembled version of events on Wednesday morning, drawn out in pieces from the particular silence that falls when she approaches a group of women near the market stalls and the particular resumption of conversation that happens when she moves away. She does not stop walking. She buys what she came to buy, settles her account with the merchant, and rides back to Broken Ridge with the purchases secured in the saddlebag and her face arranged in exactly the expression she carries when she is deciding what to do about something that cannot be undone. James hears it before Thursday. She knows because the quality of his silence shifts. He has always been a man of few words. That much was established in the first hour of their acquaintance. But there is a difference between the silence of a man who speaks rarely and the silence of a man who has decided not to speak about something specific. The latter has a direction to it. She can feel it at supper on Thursday evening when he answers her practical questions with single words and keeps his gaze on his plate rather than the window. She can feel it in the mornings when the water basin outside her door, which has appeared fresh each day without comment since the second week, is there but has been set closer to the wall. A small thing, barely worth noting. But it is a retreat from a habit that had begun to feel intentional, and Nora notes every retreat. He does not confront her. He does not ask whether there is truth to what the town is saying. He simply draws back, the way a man draws back from a fire he is no longer certain is safe to be near, and he does it without announcing the movement. Nora does not explain herself. She has done nothing that requires explanation, and she is not willing to defend herself against a story she did not tell. What she does not say because the timing is wrong and the ground between them too uncertain is that she knows exactly what kind of story it is, the kind that serves someone else's purpose, the kind that arrives too conveniently, too specifically aimed at the weakest joint in an arrangement, to have started from nothing. She adds the date to the notebook. It is a precise kind of rumor, not broad, not careless, shaped to isolate rather than merely discredit. Someone wanted her positioned as expendable. The drawer is unlocked on a Thursday afternoon. Nora is at the writing desk in the front room, organizing the household accounts before the Millhaven invoice arrives, when she reaches past the open desk for the ink bottle and notices the drawer beside it, the one James keeps shut, always, the one she has never attempted to open. It is not fully open. It has simply failed to catch, the latch slightly ajar, the drawer pulled an inch toward her by some small shift of the desk's weight. She sits with that for a moment. Then she opens it. She is not searching for anything. What she finds is simply what is there. A stack of papers folded precisely, the top sheet bearing the seal of the United States General Land Office in Denver. She can read the heading without unfolding the document. Colton Land Grant, Colorado Territory, Parcel Survey Reference, 1871. The name beneath the seal is not James Cole. It is James Colton. She does not remove the papers. She does not unfold them further. She sits with the ink bottle in one hand and the drawer open before her and reads what she can see, which is enough. Below the grant document, barely visible at the fold, is a rough map, hand-drawn but precise, with survey lines extending in every direction from the Broken Ridge property marker. The lines cover the valley, not just the ranch, the valley. She closes the drawer. She sets the ink bottle down. For a long moment, she simply looks at her own hands flat on the desk surface and thinks about a man who wears cracked boots and silver spurs and signs his name half a syllable shorter than it was given to him. She thinks about Douglas Hale watching from the far edge of the street on the day she arrived. not with curiosity, but with the contained attention of someone tracking the position of something he intends to acquire. She thinks about the way Hale looked at James, even in passing during the week since, with a patience that has never resembled the patience of a man who considers himself outmatched. She understands now what James is. She does not yet understand why he is hiding it inside a ranch that looks like a man's last effort rather than his foundation, but she understands the shape of the secret, and she understands that Hale knows it too, and that changes the arithmetic of everything she has been watching since the day she walked into this valley with $2 in her coat and nowhere left to go. She picks up her pen and returns to the household accounts without a word to anyone. The offer arrives on a Sunday. Nora comes out of the church service into the thin October sunlight, the air sharp enough to show breath, the mountains to the west layered in successive shades of steel and white, and Douglas Hale is waiting at the bottom of the church steps. He is not a physically imposing man. He is average in height, dressed more carefully than the occasion warrants, with close-set eyes carrying the particular intelligence of someone who has learned to make himself appear less dangerous than he is. He holds his hat in both hands and smiles when she reaches the bottom step, the way a man smiles when harmlessness is the tool he needs. He introduces himself as though she does not already know who he is, and he speaks with the measured cadence of someone who has rehearsed an approach while concealing the rehearsal. He tells her Broken Ridge is a fine property with potential far beyond its current condition. He tells her he represents buyers who understand what this valley will look like in 5 years when the rail lines come through, and that those buyers are prepared to make a generous offer, generous enough, he says, that a woman in her position, newly arrived without established roots in the territory, might find it worth considering. Nora listens to all of it. She watches his eyes while he speaks. He is not looking at her the way a man looks at someone he is genuinely trying to persuade. He is looking at her the way a man looks at a lever. He is deciding how hard to press. "I'm not the one to speak to about the ranch," she says. "You're Mrs. Cole," Hale replies, with the smooth patience of someone prepared for this exact answer. "That makes the property your concern as well." "My husband manages the land." "Of course." He tilts his head slightly. "I only thought, given the circumstances of the arrangement, that having options might be worth knowing about." The phrase lands with the precision of something sharpened specifically for this moment, given the circumstances of the arrangement. He knows about the rumor. He may have made the rumor, and he is telling her, without stating it plainly, that he understands the marriage to be a transaction, and that a woman in a transactional marriage has less reason to protect the transaction's other party than a wife in a real one. Nora looks at him for one additional second. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she says, and walks past him toward the road. She does not tell James that afternoon. She spends one evening placing this new piece against everything else she has assembled since the accounts, since the barn, since the unlocked drawer. By Monday she has placed it clearly, and what the whole picture shows her is not complicated. Hale approached her not because she holds any legitimate claim over the property. She holds none that would survive scrutiny, but because he needed a different kind of pressure. He calculated that a woman with no standing, no community ties, and a marriage built on paper would be the easiest door to move. That involving her would fracture whatever fragile working trust exists between her and James before the documents from Denver arrive and the legal ground solidifies beneath James's feet. He misjudged her. That is his first and most consequential error. She tells James on Monday evening, standing in the kitchen doorway after supper, plain and without preface. A man named Hale approached her outside the church service on Sunday with a purchase offer for Broken Ridge. She refused on the spot. James goes very still. He is at the counter with his coffee, and the stillness that comes over him is not his usual reserve. It is concentration, the kind a man holds when something he has been tracking for a long time has just moved in a direction he did not fully anticipate. "What did he say?" James says. Not a question. She gives him the shape of it, the offered price, the mention of rail lines, the phrase about circumstances. She leaves nothing out except the drawer. She is not ready to surface that yet. The timing must be right, and the timing is not right. When she finishes, the kitchen holds its breath for a moment. The wind has come up outside, pressing flat against the window glass. carrying the smell of coming cold down from the upper passes. "He came to you directly," James says. "Yes." His jaw tightens by a fraction. He sets the cup down without drinking from it. "Someone told him enough to make that worth trying," he says. Quieter now, and aimed less at her than at something he is working through behind those dark, closed eyes. Nora watches him arrive at the same edge she reached 2 days earlier. She does not point him there. She holds the silence and lets him find it on his own terms. He looks at her then, really looks at her the way he rarely does, the careful containment in his face briefly replaced by something that carries no simple name but sits somewhere between recognition and unease. "You didn't consider it," he says. "No," she says. He holds her gaze one beat longer than he ever has before. Then he reaches for his coat on the hook beside the back door and goes out into the November dark to check the cattle lines, the same route he walks every evening, the same purposeful silence. But his coffee cup is still on the counter, and for the first time since Nora arrived at Broken Ridge, he forgot to rinse it before he left. She picks it up, rinses it, sets it upside down on the counter the way she has watched him do every morning without a thought. Outside, the wind has dropped to a low current moving through the brittle grass in long, deliberate pulls. Somewhere across the dark valley, the road to Coldwater Creek runs cold and unlit under a sky packed with hard winter stars. And on the desk in the front room, the drawer sits perfectly latched, and the name James Colton waits behind it in the dark, patient as the mountains and just as impossible to move. The pressure James applies is not the kind that announces itself. He does not gather the hands in the yard and put questions to them directly. He does not raise his voice or rearrange the daily work in any visible way. What he does is quieter than that, a shift in proximity, in attention, in the angle from which he observes. He begins appearing at unexpected times in the places where work gets done, the barn at mid-morning when the hands expect him in the north pasture, the supply room at dusk when the day's orders are being logged, the fence line along the eastern boundary on a Tuesday when his usual route keeps him west. He says very little. He watches with the still unhurried focus of a man who has learned that silence extracts more than questions. Nora observes the shift and says nothing. She has her own work to do. She has been cross-referencing. The notebook has grown over the past weeks into something dense and precise, not a diary, not a record of feelings, but a document in the most functional sense. Dates in the left margin, events in the center, observations in a tighter hand on the right where she runs out of column space. She works through it on Saturday morning while James is out, spreading the pages flat on the kitchen table and laying them against the ledger entries she has marked, and the small separate list she keeps of anything she cannot immediately explain. She starts with the Springfield rumor. It reached the town's conversations sometime in early November. She can fix the date with reasonable precision because it corresponds to the Sunday service where Martha Aldrin turned away. She works backward from there, asking herself not what the rumor said, but who could have said it. The story was specific. Debts, not merely poverty. A woman using a man, not merely marrying one out of need. That kind of specificity requires a source. A guess produces vague shapes. This story had the weight of detail behind it. She writes down every person who knew the relevant facts of her arrival, the depleted finances, the circumstances in Springfield, the nature of the arrangement with James. She keeps the list short because the truth keeps it short. James knows. The town clerk who processed the marriage record knows the names and origin, but not the financial particulars. The boarding house keeper, Mrs. Fenwick, saw the single trunk and drew her own conclusions, but would have no motive to weaponize them. And then there are the ranch hands, who hear things without being told them, who watch the kitchen accounts and the supply orders, and the way a woman arrives with almost nothing and begins reorganizing what she finds. Pete has been at Broken Ridge longer than any of them. She does not write his name yet. She keeps moving, checking each event against the column on the right side of the page. The barn beam. She was outside alone when she found the horseshoe marks. She documented this on the same afternoon, before telling anyone what she had found. The only person she spoke to afterward was Pete, who passed her on the return to the kitchen and asked how the beam had come down. A casual question, an easy question. She had given him the answer James gave: old wood, weight, and time. Pete had agreed with that version, efficiently, and moved on. She circles his name in the margin with one deliberate stroke. For a moment, she considers the possibility of coincidence, proximity mistaken for intent, but the pattern holds under every angle she tests, and it does not loosen. The entry she is looking for is 3 pages back from the current date. The Wednesday she rode to Millhaven. She had told the hands she was going to town for household supplies. It was Pete who had been at the water trough that morning, who had tipped his hat, who had been in a position to watch which direction she took when she left the property. The Millhaven contract produced no leak. Hale could not have known about it from Pete, because by the time Pete could have reported anything, the contract was already signed. But that Wednesday is also 2 days before Hale's approach outside the church. 2 days is enough time for a careful man to deliver information and for Hale to calculate his next move. She keeps going. Every entry, every date, every margin note. When she finishes, she sits back and looks at what the page shows her. Pete is present, with access or proximity, at every point where private information became external pressure. Not once, not twice, every time. She is still at the table when she hears boots on the porch steps, not James's stride, heavier and evenly spaced, but 2 sets, one of them Pete's particular measured gait, that she has learned over 8 weeks without meaning to. The other belongs to Dawes, the youngest of the hands, who she has always found straightforward and without artifice. She puts the notebook in her apron pocket and goes to the door. Pete is speaking to Dawes in the yard, with the relaxed authority of a man explaining something obvious. She catches only the last few words before they notice her, but they are enough. Pete is telling Dawes that the problem with the recent supply irregularities is likely the new man James brought on 2 weeks ago, a drifter named Carr who had come in from the Eastern Valley with references that nobody checked. He says it the way men say things they want to sound like conclusions, not accusation but common sense. Nora steps off the porch. Dawes looks up and touches his hat. Pete turns with the same cooperative ease he has always carried, the same uncomplicated expression. "Ma'am," Pete says. "I need the full crew at the barn in 10 minutes, Nora says. Pete does not show anything. "Something wrong?" 10 minutes, she says. She does not wait to see whether they comply. She crosses to the bunkhouse, knocks once, and repeats the instruction to the 2 hands inside. Then she goes to the barn and stands in the middle of it, with her notebook open to the first page of her cross-reference, and waits. They come. All 4 of them, including Pete, who positions himself at the near edge of the group, with the body language of a man who has done nothing wrong and is faintly puzzled by the inconvenience. Nora does not raise her voice. She does not perform. She reads from the notebook. Not everything. She is not interested in constructing a spectacle. She reads the dates, the events, the observations. She reads Pete's name against each entry without editorializing, without accusation, with the same flat precision she uses when reading a column of figures that do not balance. She presents it the way a ledger presents itself. The numbers are the argument, and the numbers say what they say. When she finishes, the barn is quiet. Dawes is looking at the floor. The other 2 hands are looking at Pete. Pete is looking at Nora, and for the first time since she arrived on the property, the cooperative ease in his face has gone somewhere else and left a harder thing in its place. "I've worked this ranch 4 years, he says. "I know," she says. "You can take your wages from Mr. Cole when he returns. Leave the property before dark." Pete holds her gaze for another moment, long enough to make a point, not long enough to cross a line, and then he turns and walks out of the barn without looking at the other men. Nora closes the notebook. She looks at Dawes and the 2 others. "I'll need everyone through the weekend," she says. "The eastern herd needs moving before the first snow." Dawes nods. The others follow. Pete is gone from the property inside an hour. What she does not yet know, and will learn from Dawes 2 days later, who heard it from the merchant's boy in town, is that Pete rode directly to Hale's office on the main street of Coldwater Creek and was inside for the better part of an afternoon. She adds the date and detail to the notebook when she hears it, and the entry sits beside the others like the last piece of a survey that finally shows you the true edge of the land. The eastern herd is the more immediate problem. James made clear in his first week's account of the ranch operations that the eastern cattle needed to reach the lower valley pasture, before the mountain passes began icing over. Once the first significant snow fell, the terrain between Broken Ridge and the lower ground became unreliable for moving livestock, and a herd stranded at elevation through a Colorado Territory winter was a herd that did not survive it intact. The work was scheduled for the following week, when James expected to have full crew available. He no longer has full crew available. Nora is standing at the pasture fence on Friday morning, counting the animals and calculating the math when she makes her decision. She rides to Millhaven that afternoon. Grady, the merchant, knows everyone in the valley by necessity, and he knows immediately who she means when she describes what she needs. 2 men, capable, available on short notice, willing to work a cattle drive for fair wages without requiring a lengthy reference process. He sends her to the far end of Millhaven's single road, where a livery stable doubles as informal lodging for seasonal workers. The 2 brothers she finds there, Ellis and Cade Marsh, 28 and 24, both of them sun-darkened and quiet in the way of men who have worked land long enough to let it do the talking, listen to her terms without interrupting. Ellis asks 2 questions: the daily rate and how long the drive would take. She answers both. They shake on it. She returns to Broken Ridge with 2 hired men and a plan for the morning. The work takes 2 days. The first is cold and slow, the herd resistant to moving in the grey November chill, the ground in the higher section firmer than expected, but not yet dangerous. Nora rides the perimeter while the Marsh brothers work the animals with doors and the remaining hands, keeping the edges clean, watching for strays, making the decisions that need making when the cattle bunch against the fence line and someone has to choose the alternate route. By the second afternoon, the herd is in the lower pasture. The gate is latched, and the sky to the northwest has gone the flat white grey of snow that has not yet decided to fall. James returns from town as she is stabling her mare. He stands in the yard and looks at the lower pasture, the herd visible in the failing light settled, intact, and then at Ellis and Cade Marsh unsaddling their horses near the fence, and then at Nora. She tells him Pete is gone and why. She tells him about the Marsh brothers and the terms she agreed to. She tells him the monthly accounts will close for the first time without a single entry from Hale's operation. James listens. He looks at the lower pasture again. He stands very still in the way that means his mind is elsewhere, working something that will not be rushed. "Come inside," he says finally. She follows him to the kitchen. He does not sit. He stands at the far counter with his coat still on and his hat in his hands, and looks at the floor for a long moment before looking at her. "How did you know it was Pete?" She sets the notebook on the table. He picks it up. He reads slowly. She can tell by the way his eyes move, careful and thorough, the way he examines anything that matters. He turns to the cross-reference pages and reads those too. When he sets it down, he is quiet for a long time. "Pete worked this ranch 4 years, he says. Nora says nothing. James turns the hat in his hands twice. Outside, the wind has come down from the passes in a long, cold current, moving through the brittle grass with a sound like paper being turned. He sets the hat on the counter. What he says next comes out slowly, like something he has been calculating the cost of saying. He tells her the land is worth more than anything in Coldwater Creek currently understands. He tells her there is a railway survey completed the previous spring that places the main trunk line through the lower valley, through the heart of the property described in a land grant bearing the name Colton. He tells her Douglas Hale obtained a copy of that survey through a contact in the territorial legislature before the information was publicly filed, and that Hale has been working every angle available to him since then to acquire, inherit, or otherwise attach himself to the land before the documents from Denver can be confirmed and registered. He tells her the documents are already in Denver, that he sent them 9 weeks ago, that the man he is waiting on is an investigator from the General Land Office, and that the letter she saw him pocket on the day she arrived was the first confirmation that the investigator had received the file. He tells her all of this standing at the far counter in his coat, not looking at her, his voice level and precise and carrying only the facts he has decided she needs to have. He does not apologize for the weeks of silence surrounding it. He does not explain why he withheld it before now. He says only at the end that she found most of it herself, and that continuing to say nothing no longer serves any purpose he can justify. Nora stands across the kitchen from him and takes in everything he has said. She does not ask about the surname. She does not reach for the drawer. The time for that will come, and it will come on terms she chooses. "How long until Denver responds?" she says. "Weeks," he says. "Maybe less." She nods. She turns to the stove, moves the kettle to the hot plate, and begins assembling 2 cups. Behind her, she hears him finally take off his coat and hang it on the door hook. She hears the chair push back from the table, his chair, and the sound of him sitting down. She puts both cups on the table. She sits across from him. The kettle takes a long time to boil. Neither of them fills the waiting with words. Outside, the first snow begins to fall over Coldwater Creek. Not a storm, just the season's initial quiet declaration, settling across the mountains and the valley floor and the broken ridge pastures in the same unhurried way that all the most consequential things have settled here, gradually and then all at once and without asking anyone's permission. The last week of October arrives in Coldwater Creek the way the season's final opportunities always arrive in cattle country, with urgency dressed as occasion. The annual livestock auction draws every working rancher within a day's ride of the valley, and the town reorganizes itself around the event, with the practiced efficiency of a place that understands where its commerce lives. The wide dirt lot beside the stockyard fills with pens of cattle from a dozen properties, their breath rising in pale columns in the cold morning air. The main street takes on a particular energy. Men in from the outer ranches, merchants opening early. The boarding house full for the first time since summer, the smell of sawdust and animals and wood smoke thick enough to rest a hand on. Nora has never attended a cattle auction. In Springfield, she attended church socials and Tuesday markets, and near the end, a creditor's office where a man with small eyes explained to her in polite language what she had nothing left to give. An outdoor livestock sale in the Colorado Territory is a different taxonomy of event entirely, and she approaches it the way she approaches most things she does not yet know, with her eyes fully open and her conclusions held back until the evidence warrants them. James drives them into town before full light, the wagon carrying the Broken Ridge entries for the auction pen. 12 head of autumn stock, well conditioned, the records clean. He has said little on the drive-in, which is not unusual, but the quality of his silence this morning has something compressed inside it. Attention that is not directed at her, but is present nonetheless, like a string pulled 1 notch tighter than comfortable. She has noticed it since breakfast and has not questioned it. The stockyard is already loud when they arrive, men moving cattle through the wooden chutes, the auctioneer's assistant chalking numbers on the penboards, conversations running in overlapping currents across the yard. James hands the stock over to Dawes, who has driven in separately with Ellis Marsh, and moves through the crowd with the contained deliberateness she has come to recognize as his natural state in public. Present, but not open, acknowledging greetings with a nod or a single word, keeping his gaze moving without appearing to search. Nora stays close, not because she has been asked to, but because this is the largest gathering of Coldwater Creek's population she has encountered since her arrival, and large gatherings are where the social architecture of a place becomes visible. She maps it as she moves. Who speaks to James with ease, who with caution, who watches her with curiosity, who with that residual coolness she has come to recognize as the rumor's lingering footprint. Martha Aldrin passes them near the auction table and nods with the careful neutrality of a woman who has not yet decided which version of events to believe. Douglas Hale is at the north end of the stockyard when Nora first sees him. He is not watching the cattle. He is standing with 2 men she does not recognize, one of them carrying a leather satchel that sits against his side with the particular weight of papers rather than tools. And he is talking with the easy, measured confidence of someone who has already run through the afternoon's events in sequence and found them satisfactory. He does not look their direction. He does not need to. The auction runs through the morning without incident. The Broken Ridge stock draws fair numbers. Not the top of the day, but respectable, consistent with well-kept animals from a mid-size operation. James accepts the figures without visible reaction and moves the paperwork through the clerk's table efficiently. Around him, the broader business of the yard continues, conversations about pricing, about the incoming winter, about whether the rail survey rumors are credible and what they might mean for land values in the valley come spring. Nora is at the edge of the clerk's table reviewing the receipt when she hears the shift in the crowd's texture, a particular modulation, the drop in ambient conversation that happens when something has drawn collective attention to a single point. She looks up. Hale has moved to the center of the lot, near the main auction platform, and he has brought the two men with him. The one with the satchel is opening it now, drawing out a sheaf of papers folded to the formal dimensions of a legal document. Hale's voice, when he speaks, carries the precise volume of a man who wants to be heard without appearing to perform. I have a matter of public record that requires the community's attention before today's transactions are finalized. The yard quiets further. This is a small enough town that public declarations are rare enough to command an audience, and the language of public record carries a formal weight that stops men mid-conversation. The auctioneer steps to one side. The crowd rearranges itself in the instinctive way of people who want to see without being seen to want it. Hale presents the documents with the deliberate calm of a man who has handled legal proceedings before. He speaks clearly without rush, laying out the claim in logical sequence. A debt contract signed by James Cole in the autumn of 1869, when the Broken Ridge property was first being established on marginal credit. A supply arrangement with Hale's operation, he says, that included a default clause, standard in high-risk frontier lending, he assures the crowd, allowing the creditor to claim a 40% equity stake in the property upon non-payment past a specified term. He states that the debt was never settled, that the term has long since passed, and that he is presenting the matter publicly as a matter of legal transparency before pursuing formal remedy. He hands the documents to the clerk's assistant at the table. Nora watches James across the open space between them. He has gone very still. Not the managed stillness of his ordinary reserve. Something different. Something that goes deeper. The particular quality of a man who has encountered a document he cannot immediately counter. His jaw is set. His hands are at his sides, not moving. He is reading the paper the assistant has placed before him, and his expression is doing nothing at all, which tells her the situation is serious because James's face only goes that completely blank when he is containing something large. She moves to the clerk's table. She does not run. She does not raise her voice to announce herself. She simply crosses the yard with the even stride she uses when she has already made a decision and is executing it. And she reaches the table and picks up the document before the assistant has fully registered her presence. The crowd watches. Nora reads. She reads slowly enough to be thorough, and quickly enough that she reaches what she is looking for before the silence in the yard has time to become something else. The document is formatted correctly. The heading, the date, the signature block. The signature itself is plausible, a compressed, forward-leaning script that could belong to a man who writes sparingly. The terms are as Hale described: supply credit, default clause, equity assignment. And then there are the reference numbers. Every formal supply contract in this territory carries a numerical reference corresponding to the issuing merchant's account ledger, a sequential number assigned at the time the contract is opened, which must match the corresponding entry in the ledger's record of active accounts. It is a detail so routine that most people who sign such documents never look at it. It is the kind of detail that only matters when something is wrong. Nora has spent 2 months reading Hale's accounting system. She has circled 11 entries in the Broken Ridge ledger. She has tracked the numbering sequences of every invoice that passed through the Broken Ridge accounts during that period, and she knows, with the particular certainty of someone who has done the same arithmetic enough times to trust it, that Hale's sequential account numbers in the autumn of 1869 ran in a specific range, a range she can reconstruct from the invoices she audited, working backward from the oldest entries in the ranch records. The number on this document is not in that range. It is not close to that range. It falls in a sequence that, by the progression of Hale's own invoicing system as documented in the Broken Ridge ledger, would correspond to accounts opened no earlier than the spring of 1871, a full year and a half after the date printed at the top of this contract. A contract dated in 1869 cannot carry an account number that did not exist until 1871. She sets the document on the clerk's table and looks up at the assistant, a young man named Garrett, who has worked the clerk's office for 3 years and whose handwriting she recognizes from the ranch's deed registration. "I need the original supply account ledger from Mr. Hale's operation," she says. "The 1869 volume." Garrett looks at her. He looks at Hale. The crowd is very quiet now. "The ledger," Nora says again, "or the account registration records from the territorial clerk's office. Either will serve." Garrett, to his considerable credit, is a young man who understands the weight of a public proceeding and the difference between a request and a demand, and Nora's voice carries enough of the latter that he moves to the records cabinet behind the table without being asked twice. Hale speaks from across the lot. This is an unnecessary disruption of a clear legal matter. "The account number on this contract is 43471, Nora says, loud enough to carry. She does not look at Hale when she says it. She is looking at the ledger Garrett is now opening before her. Mr. Hale's account records from the Broken Ridge supply invoices show that his numbering sequence reached 4,000 in the first quarter of 1871. The account series in the 4400s did not exist in 1869. The yard is absolutely still. She finds the entry she needs in under a minute. The ledger is organized in Garrett's own careful hand, the registration numbers sequential and dated. She places the document beside the ledger and sets both flat on the table so that the numbers sit side by side, readable from where the nearest men are standing. "The number on this contract," she says, "did not exist at the time this contract claims to have been written." Garrett looks at both documents for a long moment. He is not a man of dramatic gestures. He simply nods once, with the straightforward honesty of someone who has looked at something and seen what it is. "She's right," he says. "These numbers don't correspond." The yard exhales. Hale says something. She hears the shape of it without the content, some effort at reframing, at alternative explanation. But the crowd has already heard Garrett, and Garrett has been the territorial clerk's assistant for 3 years and has no stake in James Cole's land, and the arithmetic is on the table where anyone with eyes can read it. It is in that moment, with the documents open and the crowd's attention suspended between what it has just understood and what comes next, that James moves. She hears him before she sees him. His boots on the hard-packed dirt crossing the yard, with a different quality of stride than any she has heard from him before. Not the measured, self-contained gait of his ordinary movement, but something more direct, less calculated, the stride of a man who has stopped weighing a decision and started carrying it out. He comes to stand beside her at the clerk's table, not in front of her, not behind her. Beside her, close enough that his arm is level with her shoulder, and he sets one hand at the center of her back, not gripping, not directing, simply present, a hand placed with the deliberate, unambiguous clarity of a man making a statement he has no intention of qualifying. Coldwater Creek stares. She feels the warmth of his hand through the wool of her coat, and she does not move, and she does not look at him immediately because she is looking at the documents on the table and at Hale across the yard, whose face has gone to the specific composition of a man watching the last available ground disappear beneath his feet. James speaks at a volume the whole yard can hear. Broken Ridge belongs to James Colton. A pause, deliberate, carrying the full weight of a name used in full for the first time in public. The land grant bearing that name has been filed with the General Land Office in Denver since September. Any dispute over this property goes to federal jurisdiction. Mr. Hale is welcome to take his documents to Denver and explain the account numbering to the territorial judge. The silence that follows is not empty. It is full, packed with the collective recalibration of every person in that yard who has known James Cole for years and is now assembling a new understanding from materials they were never given access to before this moment. Hale looks at James. He looks at the table with the documents. He looks at Nora. She meets his gaze directly and holds it and gives him nothing. Whatever calculation Hale has been running for the past months reaches its conclusion somewhere in the space of those seconds. His two men exchange a look. The one with the now empty satchel takes a half-step back. Hale retrieves the fraudulent document from the table with a composure that costs him something visible in the effort, tucks it into his coat, and addresses the crowd once more with a statement about legal review and proper process that lands in the air and dissolves without finding purchase. Then he walks away. Not fast, but away. The auction resumes within minutes, because frontier commerce does not pause for long, and the auctioneer is a practical man with a schedule to keep. Conversations restart with the slightly elevated frequency of people who have just witnessed something worth discussing for the next several seasons. Garrett returns the ledger to its cabinet with the particular care of a young man who has understood his own role in the afternoon's events and is quietly satisfied with how he performed it. James's hand is no longer on her back. He is standing beside her at the table, reviewing the receipt for the Broken Ridge stock. His face returned to its usual composure. But the composure is not quite the same as it was this morning. Something in it has shifted, not cracked, not exposed, but altered in some structural way, the way timber shifts when weight is finally applied in the direction it was built to hold. "Colton," Nora says, quietly. Not a question. "Yes," he says, equally quiet. She picks up her copy of the auction receipt and folds it into her coat pocket alongside the Millhaven invoice, and the notes she has been keeping since the first morning she opened his ledger without permission. The crowd moves around them with its ordinary business. The cattle in the pens are indifferent to everything that has just occurred. "You could have told me," she says. James is quiet for a moment. Then, "You already knew." She looks at him sidelong. "Not all of it." "Enough," he says. Nora holds her response for a beat. Across the yard, Dawes is completing the stock paperwork with Ellis Marsh, neither of them looking in their direction with any particular deliberateness, which means they are being scrupulously careful not to appear to be watching, which means they watch the entire thing. "The number," James says, and there is something in his voice that is not quite the same as anything she has heard from him before, lower, stripped of its usual management. "How did you know to look at the number?" "The same way I knew about Pete," she says. He considers this for a moment. "The notebook," he says. "The notebook," she confirms. He does not say anything further on the subject. He picks up his own paperwork and straightens it against the table's edge. Around them, Coldwater Creek continues its commerce, its conversations, its daily weighing of who holds what and who has just lost ground. The mountains to the west have gone a flat, uniform grey under the afternoon's overcast, the kind of sky that is deciding between clearing and closing in, the kind that does not tell you which until it has already chosen. James gestures toward the wagon. Nora walks beside him, and neither of them speaks again until they are clear of the lot, the noise of the auction falling behind them, the road back to Broken Ridge opening ahead in the cold, pale light of a late October afternoon that has just become something neither of them could have accurately predicted when it began. The investigator from the General Land Office arrives on a Tuesday morning in the first week of November, riding in from the Denver stage with the unhurried manner of a man who understands that his presence alone has already settled most of what he came to settle. His name is Aldred Birch. He is compact and grey-haired, with the precise diction of someone trained in the language of federal documents, and he carries 2 leather cases that he does not set down carelessly. He takes a room at the boarding house, presents his credentials to the territorial clerk's office before noon on the day he arrives, and begins his review of the relevant records with the methodical efficiency of a process that has been in motion since September, since a letter bearing the General Land Office seal was folded into a drawer at Broken Ridge, and a woman with grey-green eyes noted the timbre and said nothing. James meets with him on Wednesday. Nora does not attend the meeting. She has not been asked to, and she does not insert herself into proceedings that are James's to navigate. What she does is prepare the ranch accounts for the week, complete the Millhaven order, and wait with the particular quality of patience she has developed over the past months. Not passive, not resigned, but the patience of someone who has done their portion of the work and understands that certain conclusions must arrive on their own schedule. Birch takes 3 days. On Friday afternoon, he files his findings with the Territorial Clerk's Office. The Colton land grant is confirmed valid under the federal land records of 1868. The property survey is consistent with the filed description, and the claim is registered in the name of James Colton, effective from the original grant date. The filing is public record. By Saturday morning, Coldwater Creek knows. The consequences for Douglas Hale do not arrive in a single blow. They arrive the way his damage arrived, methodically in sequence, each one closing a door he had previously kept open. Birch's investigation into the fraudulent contract expands within the week to include a formal referral to the territorial attorney's office in Denver. The forgery is not difficult to establish. Nora's account numbering analysis, corroborated by the clerk's ledger records, provides the foundation, and Birch adds 3 additional inconsistencies he finds in the document's formatting that place its actual creation well within the past year. The referral generates a criminal proceeding. Hale is notified by courier. He does not leave Coldwater Creek immediately. He is not the kind of man who flees, which would be an admission, but the nature of his presence in the town changes overnight. The merchants who have extended him courtesy on account of his influence begin to find reasons to be unavailable. The men who drank with him at the saloon on Friday evenings develop prior engagements. The social architecture of a frontier town is not subtle when it redistributes itself. The debt execution comes the following month, through the territorial court, in response to a separate claim filed by 2 ranchers who had carried supply grievances against Hale's operation for years and found in the new legal climate that the moment for filing had arrived. His general supply operation is assessed against outstanding debts, the building and inventory attached by court order, and the business closed before the first hard freeze locks the valley roads. Hale departs for Denver to answer the criminal proceedings in January. He does not return to Coldwater Creek. This is not a formal condition of anything. It is simply the outcome of a man whose particular kind of power was entirely dependent on proximity and fear, and who, stripped of both, has no reason to come back to a place that watched him lose. Pete does not face a judge. What he faces is quieter and, in the long run, more complete. Word moves through the valley ranches in the way that practical information moves among men who depend on each other's honesty to function, without ceremony, without drama, simply as a fact that people know and account for when they make decisions. No ranch within a day's ride of Coldwater Creek puts Pete on their payroll come spring. He drifts east before winter closes the passes, and no further word of him reaches Broken Ridge. Nora records his departure date in the notebook, and does not add another entry on the subject. The railway announcement reaches Coldwater Creek in the second week of December, carried in the Territorial Gazette and confirmed by 2 separate surveyors who arrive in town to finalize the route maps. The main trunk line will pass through the lower valley, bisecting a corridor of land that sits in its entirety within the boundaries of the Colton Grant. The implication for the property's value is not subtle, and the town does not treat it subtly. Men who have nodded at James Cole for years with the respectful indifference reserved for solitary ranchers now tip their hats with a different quality of attention. The dry goods merchant's wife returns Nora's greeting at the Sunday service with warmth that has not previously been available. Nora accepts the warmth with the same equanimity she accepted its absence. The ranch continues its work. The winter is demanding in the way that Colorado Territory winters are always demanding. Relentless cold. Feed management. The daily arithmetic of keeping animals alive and structures intact through months that do not negotiate. James and Nora move through it with the practiced coordination of 2 people who have learned each other's working rhythms without ever sitting down to do so deliberately. The kitchen table has 2 cups on it every morning. The porch receives them both in the evenings, when the cold is manageable, and the sky goes its deep star-packed black over the mountains. The space between them has changed in some structural way since the auction yard. Not dissolved, but altered, the way a room changes when furniture that has been arranged for function is finally arranged for comfort. Neither of them names it. It is a Sunday evening in mid-December, when Nora sits at the writing desk for the last time with a purpose she has been considering for 2 weeks. She takes out the original agreement, the document signed in the cartridge clerk's office on the second day after her arrival, with its clean transactional language and its careful division of responsibilities, its quartered distances and its clauses built for 2 people who needed a legal arrangement and nothing further. She reads it from beginning to end. It is a well-constructed document. It served what it was designed to serve. She sets it aside. She takes a fresh sheet of paper. What she writes is not long. It does not need to be. It is not a contract in any sense the cartridge clerk would recognize. There are no clauses, no default provisions, no language built for dissolution. It is closer to a letter than a legal instrument, and what it says in the plain and undecorated language she has always preferred is that the arrangement they entered in October of 1872 has ceased to describe anything that is actually occurring at Broken Ridge, and that she would like to begin again on terms that reflect what is true rather than what was convenient. It says she is not asking for anything she is not prepared to give in return. It says she has learned in 4 months on this land that she is not willing to maintain a careful distance from the only life that has felt like hers. She does not write his name at the top. She folds it once and leaves it on the center of his desk, where the morning light from the east-facing window will hit it first thing. She goes to bed and does not sleep for a considerable time. Before closing her eyes, she notices her hand resting against the edge of the desk, and unbidden remembers the impression of wax once pressed beneath her thumb, a symbol she has not allowed herself to consider in months. James comes in late from checking the barn. She hears his boots on the stairs, the particular sequence of sounds that marks his return each night, sounds she has memorized without intending to. She hears him pause in the hallway outside his room. She hears the creak of the desk chair as he sits. The house is very quiet after that. In the morning, the paper is gone from the desk. James is already outside when she comes down. The coffee is on the stove, enough for 2 the way it always is now, and his cup is on the table rather than the counter, in the place he has taken to sitting for the past several weeks. She pours both cups and waits. He comes in from the cold with frost on his coat collar and his hat dusted white from a brief early morning flurry that has already stopped. He hangs the coat. He sits. He wraps both hands around the cup. He does not say anything for a long moment. She does not fill the silence. Then he sets the cup down and reaches across the table, not to shake her hand. Not with the brisk finality of a contract concluded. He simply extends his hand across the table with the open, unhurried certainty of a man who has made a decision he will not be revising. And he looks at her with those dark, close eyes and says he does not want another signed document. That they have had 2 of those and neither of them said the right thing, the kitchen holds the moment. Nora looks at his hand on the table between them, the hand with the scar along the left knuckle, whose origin she still does not know, the hand that was placed flat on the center of her back in an auction yard in front of every soul in Coldwater Creek on the last week of October. She places her hand in his. He closes his fingers around it once, steady and certain, and neither of them says anything further because nothing further is required. Outside, the snow has started again in the thin, exploratory way of early December flurries, not committing yet, just reminding the valley of what is coming, and the Broken Ridge pastures are pale and still under a white sky, and the mountains stand exactly where they have always stood, unchanged by any of the season's proceedings, vast and patient and entirely indifferent to the small human warmth inside one kitchen on the valley floor. 3 days pass in the new way of things, a way that has no name yet, but that both of them move through with the particular ease of something that has been true for longer than it has been acknowledged. On the 3rd morning, the post-rider comes up the Broken Ridge Road before the household is fully awake. Nora takes the small bundle from him at the door, 2 supply notices, a gazette folded in thirds, and a letter. She almost sets it with the others. Then she sees the seal. It is not a printed frank, not a name, not a return address in the standard sense. It is a symbol pressed into dark wax, a small specific shape that she recognizes in the space between one heartbeat and the next, from a life she arrived here carrying and has not once, in 4 months, spoken of aloud. The shape of it lands somewhere behind her sternum with a physical weight. She stands in the open doorway with the cold coming in around her boots and the morning light grey and flat across the snow-covered yard, and she looks at the letter for a long moment. Her hands, which have remained steady through account audits and barn inspections and auction yard confrontations in front of an entire town, are not quite steady now. She closes the door. She does not open the letter. She sets it on the far end of the kitchen shelf, behind the flour canister, where it sits in the shadow out of the direct light. She stands with her back to it for a moment that stretches longer than she intends. The envelope she burned on her first night in Coldwater Creek, the one she fed to the boarding house fireplace before she had fully unpacked, before she had met the man she would marry the following morning, before she understood what this valley would become to her, was the last communication she believed she would ever receive from the person who pressed that seal. She was wrong. The past she thought she had left on the far side of the Continental Divide is somewhere east of here, still moving, still tracing the line of her, and it has found the address that now carries her name. She takes the kettle from the stove and pours her coffee. She sits down at the table. She looks at the window, and at the pale winter light coming through it, and at the 2 cups on the table's surface, and she does not open the letter, and she does not call for James, and she stays very still in the warm kitchen of Broken Ridge Ranch, while the snow outside makes its quiet, patient return to the valley it has always owned. Whatever is inside that envelope has waited this long. It can wait a few minutes more, but it will not wait forever. And Nora Callum, Nora Colton now in every way that the word means anything, has never been a woman who leaves a threat unexamined. She reaches for the letter.